Be here. So maybe just do a little bit of a personal introduction for me so you get an idea of who I am, where I come from. Not just that I come from Northern Ireland, that's maybe the first thing you might notice. So I joined Innovate UK 2 years ago, and cast your minds back to what 2 years ago looked like in February 2020. So I took the job, and I'll explain what the content of it is, just before we entered into the pandemic, just before we were all only allowed out 1 hour a day. And at that point, it looked like it could be fairly apocalyptic for many of us. And you just think about that journey that we've all been through, from personally, but also within manufacturing over the last couple of years. It puts a lot of this stuff in context. Before that, I was in consultancy, Boo Hiss. Before that, I was in startups. Before that, I was in industry for a long time, primarily in Rolls-Royce, but then others after that. So I guess I've got that sort of mixture of background too, which is why when this role came up, I remember the phone call that I received December, I think, 2019. You know, we'd like to offer you this job. It was a really quick conversation. It didn't take a lot of persuading. The opportunity to come and lead a program, a national program that I thought was enormous, and I'll explain to you what we're doing in this area that runs across manufacturing, was frankly too good to turn down. Of course, it hasn't turned out exactly like I expected. I didn't expect that this would probably be my 12th face-to-face meeting in 2 years, something along those lines. I expected to be out traveling a lot, meeting a lot of people, working across the UK. But it's certainly been very challenging and very interesting. I'd like to take you through some of that. So a little bit building on that, if I look at where we are from my perspective in manufacturing, so the perspective that I have comes from looking across all manufacturing sectors at once, which is sort of great for variety and curiosity, but a bit of a stretch and a challenge, as you might imagine. In April, May 2020, we didn't have the funding for this program. That was the bit they didn't tell me when they phoned me to offer me the job. And people were saying, well, should we be investing in manufacturing right now, given what's about to happen? I had to write papers explaining what I thought would happen to this program and how we would reflect it. And interestingly, what I put into that was I wouldn't say I was right, that's not the point, that we would see much stronger interest in food and pharmaceuticals and a reduction of interest from aerospace and automotive. That was primarily what we said. So there would be not a reduction in demand, but a shift in the profile of it. Now, I was slightly wrong, thankfully. Actually, in terms of what the program I'll tell you about, we've still maintained a relatively strong interest from the transport sector, which was kind of odd because at the time when I wrote the paper, we weren't traveling anywhere. So I'm based in Derby, so if you think about Derby as an economy, with trains, planes and automobiles being the main provider of employment, it's a big deal, right? So people were getting a sense of this as a sort of big disruption. If you're in the food sector, in the pharmaceutical sector, suddenly the world looks very different, and people have very different challenges across that. So what came front of mind in sort of May time, we were in ministerial meetings, or I was in ministerial meetings, first time for me. I was thinking, this is all very exciting. But it was genuinely inspiring and quite moving to hear what people were doing across the manufacturing sector. And that was useful in lots of ways, because obviously it brought home to senior people the importance of manufacturing. And that's why I'm here and what I've chosen to do with my time and my life. But it was genuinely inspiring. I remember being quite moved in some of the meetings in terms of the response across manufacturing. If you're involved in vaccines manufacturing, or you're involved in trying to deliver a resilient food supply chain, or you're trying to, in the case of a lot of aerospace companies, pivot and make ventilators at record speed in record times, all of that stuff was happening all around this time, and it was really quite fascinating to see. And hopefully that profile and the importance of manufacturing will stay with us in terms of importance to the economy, importance for us all as individuals. I think it's pretty obvious that global supply chains are complex if you're involved with any of them, and particularly in sort of things like automotive and aerospace, very deep supply chains, many, many tiers, many thousands of suppliers involved in it, and people know that. But it's not common knowledge, it's not public. You see now that we have a war in Ukraine, so we don't have wheat, or we're looking for electrical components or whatever it is, or when the north of Italy shut down, or when Wuhan shut down, people suddenly find they had suppliers in that location, and it's really difficult to get a different one in time. So we had a lot of phone calls with people saying, do you know anybody who can do this? And it, so that kind of ongoing shock is just never going to go away. And I think the perception of we'll get to some new steady state, if it's a net zero steady state, I'm not sure that's quite true. We're going to sort of constantly be dealing with those shocks and those disruptions in supply chains, in demand and supply and so on. Suez is another one, COVID's another one, Brexit's another, and that's just in the 2 years that I've been in this post. So I think that sort of ongoing disruptions and challenges of dealing with some of that is going to be around us for quite some time. If you fast forward, so take the fast forward view of 2037, 2040, so 15 years from now or so, how are we going to deliver all the products we want at net zero or better? And what does that really mean? It's really quite a profound transformation. So what products we use, how they get made, how they get delivered, how do we recycle and reuse them across all sectors. Maybe not reusing food, but all of that sort of challenge around it is really interesting. If you try and just do a thought experiment about what will it look like to deliver all that, it's a fundamental transformation of the way in which we make and deliver products. The other thing which is quite encouraging for me, if you're me, is people have recognized the critical importance of innovation, of collaboration, and particularly digitalization. Digitalization, obviously, because it enabled things like remote working. It enabled us all to be working on Teams and Zoom and other things that, frankly, we could have done 2 years ago, but now have become common practice for many of us. But in factories, being able to work remotely, monitor remotely, pass off equipment remotely, all that stuff that, again, we were partly capable of doing, but it's really accelerated some of that. What we've also seen within my program is things like research centres that I'll talk about, how intensely collaborative they are and how open people are to collaboration, more open than before. They weren't closed before, but they're definitely more open. And instead of people closing the doors in innovation, which was the paper that I had to write to explain why people are still going to be passionate about it, people said we're going to have to innovate our way out of this thing. And it's actually going to be probably a tipping point for some sectors to really deal with futures. So if I take aerospace as an example, 10 years ago, people were talking about electrified vehicles, maybe 15 years ago. But now it's becoming much more common. Now all the major players are involved. I don't really know what the future of aerospace looks like. I don't really know that, how we're going to travel around from an airspace point of view. I don't know does anybody else, frankly. There's the multiple different modes of transport, ways of working, different fuel types and so on. All of those things are up in the air to some extent. So we're remaking a lot of those industries. That's quite exciting if you're an engineer. If you're an engineer or manufacturing person, this is great. Everything's transforming. There's hundreds of new products and business models needed. But that sort of importance of innovation and how we're going to get to that future, particularly with the net zero context, is hugely important. So there are, as I said, disruptions are going to be the norm. We just have to deal with it. So the idea of a sort of steady state and things are going to tick along and it'll be plus or minus 5% from where we are now, that's unlikely to really be the case. If it ever was the case, it certainly isn't likely to be the case going forward. Net zero, circularity, sustainability, supply chain resilience, traceability. Everybody wants traceability of things in their supply chain for various reasons, whether it's for the health of the product or its ethics, its sustainability, where the material has been and how I can reuse it and so on. There's lots of different strands of work around traceability, but also having a sort of a full view across your network, an end-to-end view on supply chains. And if you think about digitalization, which is the bit really that I've got responsibility for, how does it cut across all of those things? How do we deliver that and upskill people and deliver a fundamentally better future of work through that technology? So that's one of the really interesting things we have to do. So when I look across all the sectors, I know people have said this historically for hundreds of years, we're on a tipping point of a revolution and so on. It's quite a common thing to say. But if I look across all the sectors and think about where we need to try and get to, the importance of innovation and industrializing that at scale, at pace, across. So if I want to deliver, for example, in the UK, a net zero production system, the whole production system being net zero in the UK, just imagine the scale of transformation that's needed within that. And obviously my bit is how does digitalization underpin that? But in the broader scale of are things transforming, and therefore if you're an engineer or manufacturer or a scientist, is that interesting? Of course it is. There's loads of opportunities across all sectors. Usually when I go to university type briefings, I go to universities that I studied at, I'll get a question somewhere about which things should I study? Or should I focus my time? The answer is everything. We're going to need everybody across all disciplines. So there's no thing about let's all be data scientists or let's all be a physicist or a chemist or something else. Across all the sectors, the rate of disruption and the transformational possibilities means all of the skills of scientists and engineers will be needed, whatever the discipline is. So pursue your own interest rather than trying to pick a winner for the future is usually the answer I give. So if I zoom into the actual program that I'm here to deliver rather than give you my views on manufacturing, in 2017 there was a Made Smarter report. It was published, it was led by Jürgen Meyer, industrialist at the time, leading Siemens in the UK, and co-chaired by, and there was a commission then formed by himself and the Secretary of State to try and take it forward. So in 2017, remember, right, before the pandemic, 3 years before that, if you can remember that, we hadn't Brexited, we hadn't had COVID. the world looked like quite a different place. The ambition that was by 2030, we'd be a leader in terms of digital technologies, but not just the adoption of it. It's not only a question of can manufacturers adopt it, it's a hugely important part of it, but also the creation of those and the exporting of those solutions, because these solutions become increasingly important for manufacturers outside of the UK as well as inside. The approach that they advertised was there were 4 pillars: leadership, skills, innovation, and adoption. I'm here to tell you about the innovation piece. I do occasionally say it's the biggest funded piece, but that just annoys my colleagues. And we were lucky enough to get some funding for that. It was bounded by manufacturing and supply chain, so core operational processes, the classic set of Industry 4 technology types, and how you might try and combine some of those. And we focus very much around smart factory and connected supply chain, seeing as those 2 different thematic areas for us, really. We only got full approval in September 2020. There had been some initial funding before that. But what we're trying to do, the sort of challenge is, how do you really transform the way in which how we make and deliver products and services in the UK? There's a bit of a link back to the products you actually make. So there's a link back, obviously, from manufacturing to design. But this program doesn't really deal with design and digitalization of it. I mentioned about we want to have a sort of world-changing. I get a bit tired of world-leading. Everybody wants to be world-leading or world-first. But actually the technology sector, we have quite a strong technology sector in the UK in general. We want to strengthen it with specifics around manufacturing, as well as deliver really positive manufacturing outcomes. So productivity, sustainability, and so on are really quite big challenges. Productivity in the UK across the manufacturing sector is still a challenge, and still there's plenty of room for improvement, and digitalisation can play its part in that. So the government investment is 147 million. It got announced as a £300 million challenge. You can see they've roughly doubled the number and added a bit. And that's really because it's an industry invested program as well. We run until March 2025, so anything that's got funding from us, we're already starting to feel the heat in terms of it's less than 3 years to go, and we've got an awful lot to deliver within it. So if anybody's working with me and feel under pressure for delivering stuff, that's probably why. We think forward to we're going to try and the scale of things we're trying to deliver and the pace we're trying to deliver it at. How we designed the program, I just confessed to Neil just before we started. This is slightly retrospective. If you'd asked me at the time why exactly have you got the program you've got, you may have got a slightly different answer. So the day before a conference 6 months ago, I'm trying to find a way of explaining why are we delivering this in the style we're delivering it. And this is sort of almost retrospective rationalization of it. But I think it's important to say that when I wrote it, it really rang true as the best way I could find of framing what we're doing. One is within the overall challenge investment, we want to create a connected, collaborative ecosystem. Easy to say, we're just in the midst of trying to do that right now. And I think, Connected Everything Agenda actually is a really nice sort of, I wouldn't say precursor, but an example of how to try and do that. How do we sort of connect and bring people together? One of the ideas was to create a pathway essentially from from good idea to industrialized solution, which means principally applied research all the way through to sort of scaled out industrial application. Everything we do by design has the multidisciplinary, multi-party thing in it, and that's quite deliberate. So we mandate the involvement of manufacturers, technology solution providers, RTOs, people of small and mediums as well as large in everything we do. Second key thing is people at the core. So there is a research centre on people-led digitalisation, but there's a mixture of things about this. I think the first thing is a community building. How to build, so we've got this idea, or at least we started with this idea, but how do we know lots of innovators and disruptors. How do we connect them? How do we build communities out of them? How do they sort of work with each other and really amplify each other's efforts? So we think that connecting those people together in some way, building community is really, really important. The part of diversity, it goes beyond the sort of normal characteristics. Diversity just delivers better results, right? So I'm a believer in that. It's almost unquestionable. But it also comes from different perspectives as well as different, characteristics or diversity characteristics. So when we try to do that, we try to encourage our research centres in particular, but everybody that we work with to have that outreach, not just in terms of the characteristics, but also to bring new people into it. New ideas and bringing new ideas into the sector is really important. And it's one of the things that we ask people for in interviews and in assessments. New ideas, how are you bringing new thinking into this space, whatever the area is. And this week's phrase at the moment is compellingly adoptable. I shared that with my UKRI colleagues. Somebody wanted to know what our definition was. That's our definition, compellingly adoptable. We said it and we went, that's what we mean. So when we launched the research centres that I'll describe in a second, we wanted some human factors involvement within that. And that's really about making digital solutions that are compellingly adoptable, really easy to adopt. To reduce the barriers to adoption by the innovations you create, rather than just trying to persuade people to take tools they don't know how to use. So that's one of our orientations, is really to have that human factors approach throughout the program. And then maybe it's me, but I'm sort of optimistic and positive by nature. So delivering the future we want. A new manufacturing ecosystem, delivering net zero, how do we do that? How do you deliver a transformed future of work within manufacturing? In my consultancy days, we had really, really good examples of, you go into shop floors and people want a financial improvement, they want a business case return, but equally the lives of some of the people working on those shop floors can be massively improved. And we should be aiming to do that. Across all of the different skill types that are involved in manufacturing and supply chains, how can we deliver a much better set of skills, job opportunities, job satisfaction, and so on? There is a possibility of doing that. So there's a notion that technology will do things to us and deliver some sort of dystopian state that we don't fancy. Why not take it the other way around and say, how are we going to use the technology to really improve the nature of work within manufacturing? So again, positive in its orientation. And ultimately, I believe that a strong manufacturing sector, delivered in part through digitalization, will deliver stronger resilience and sustainability and ultimately grow the economy. And that's what we've got the opportunity to do. So while all this transformation is happening, trying to sort of take that positive view on it. So a little bit less of my opinion, a bit more about the program. So the way to view this diagram, well, two things. If you've got some sort of OCD and you don't like that the arrows don't touch the circles, now that I've pointed that out, everybody's noticed. That's because I drew it, and there's no graphic design in it. This is genuine what we put up. And if you go from the top right round to the background to the top in the standards, it sort of works that way. So the research centres is the earlier TRL stage stuff. We've got 5 of those. We've got a 6th one if you include Interact, who've got a poster downstairs. I'll maybe highlight a little bit about how those research centres are meant to work. There has been one, but there'll be others, digital accelerators. So that's really about how do you take startups and SMEs, so ideas that might spin out of some of the university programs and start to scale those up, working again with industry. Round to innovation hubs, we just announced yesterday, I've lost track of days, yesterday, the Smart Factory one. I'll show you a little bit about that, and the digital supply chain. So we've got 2 areas which are innovation hubs, and they're really then to start to scale that out and industrialize a little bit further in terms of their solutions. Bottom left, CR&D is the sort of classic Innovate UK collaborative R&D programs. Most people will be familiar with those. 3 tranches of that, 60 million. And then top left, we have to globalize what we do. We live in a global environment. We can collaborate globally. We can start to scale out the solutions that we're talking about globally, start grow manufacturing globally. So we have some small programs of work, particularly in Taiwan at the minute. We've got lots of other areas that we're exploring just at the minute. Underpinning all that, there's a lot of stuff around standards and interoperability. Anybody who's in a legacy system estate primarily will know systems aren't interoperable and weren't designed to be so. And a lot of the exciting use cases that you can get to certainly in a factory setting, involve those systems talking to each other, involve an aggregation of data. So really understanding how do you make those systems interoperable is what we're talking about from standards. So we want, the arrows are important. Where we are now is research centres are funded. I was in, say, Strathclyde yesterday at the launch of their centre. We've done an accelerator. We've now just contracted the hubs. We're about to award the last round of CR&D stuff. So there's a lot of stuff up and running. That's great. A great work by the team to get us here. Now we have to work out how do the arrows work. And that's why Deborah and Nick and others within the Connected Everything group, how do we actually connect things to each other? And we're starting to do some of that, but we have to build that out. So the next sort of orientation for me and the team is to try and do that. This one, if you're industrially interested, so far there's over 500 companies engaged in the program already. The research centres in total have 132. I say over 100 because it flexes a little bit. But right now, as of today, it's 132. So there's really strong industry support across the whole program. And it doesn't mean it's all being dragged to very high TRL levels. The research centres have really got some transformative ideas within them. And so strong industry throughout and strong academic involvement throughout, really quite a nice mix of projects and consortia throughout. Those are the 5 research centres that we have. I won't tell you about all of them, but if you just sort of you can read down some of them. What's interesting, of course, is all of them are multi-university. That wasn't mandated. So that's interesting. I didn't expect that. We didn't expect all of the universities to work together. And then if you look closely, you can see there's a number of them appear repeatedly. So Strathclyde, Loughborough, Nottingham appear in multiple places in different formations. which is, again, interesting. Different parts of those universities. So when I go to Loughborough, as an example, I meet people from multiple different centres. In fact, if you include Interact, which is a sort of sixth research centre, there's people from Loughborough across, and they hadn't met each other before. I assume they all knew each other, right, because they were Loughborough. But I go there and I sort of meet them. So the interaction across these centres actually is quite interesting, both within campuses and across the centres. A range of really interesting ideas. So the morphing factories or connected factories in Nottingham, really quite a transformative idea. Do we know for sure that it is the future? No. But it was quite an interesting transformative idea, really strong industry support around it. DM Squared in Strathclyde, where I was yesterday. Again, a really strong industry consortium, really built off a lot of work that had happened previously in manufacturing hubs and others. Really interesting impact in terms of platforms, and those platforms currently orientated towards pharma, but actually could be developed elsewhere. Materials made smarter, that whole thing about circularity and how do I really understand the use of the material, how do I make sure that I know its condition, how do I have a materials passport, if you like, and that traceability piece. Really, really interesting. Of course, for high-value materials and metallic-type components and others, it's really, really vital. The people-led work with Linden and Bath and Nottingham, and Loughborough, sorry, is everybody's got a people focus in it. That's got the biggest one. So if you look at the thematic influence, the people focus is obviously a massive within Bath. The little nugget I had from that, which really resonates with my own personal experience, is the difference between what data people say they need to make decisions versus the data people actually use to make decisions. And of course, we specify our IT programs based on what people say they need. And it's not actually what they need, which then leads you back to the whole disappointment of why didn't it work, why didn't it do what I wanted? Well, I've been in that position. I've delivered IT programs and people have said, this isn't what I want. And you pull out the spec sheet and say, it's exactly what you wanted. And they say, oh, no, it isn't. You go, well, it is, because that's what you give me. So I think that and other things are really interesting insights from the Bath team. And I really like some of the wording around this, the collaborative robotics with Niels Lowe's in Loughborough, around understanding each other's intents, the robot understanding a human. It sounds quite sci-fi and quite interesting. This one is probably the most international in terms of again, we didn't say you must go international, but it has a really big international involvement, more so than some of the others. And the others are happy to try and do that. The good news, if you're industry, they've been designed to involve you, and it's not a closed shop. So it's certainly, they're really interesting. I was saying to Nick at lunchtime, the research centre decision was the hardest decision I've made so far in the programme. You may not think that, but it is, because the quality of applications was really high. The amount of industrial involvement was really, really high. The embracing of this multidisciplinary approach to it, fantastic. Nobody dropped out because they failed to do it. And we interviewed 10. I really would have funded 7. I had money for 4. We found a way of funding the 5th. So actually a real testimony to the strength of the research base in this area and the fact that the industry are absolutely engaged with it. Really interesting that they all chose to work across multiple universities. And the multi-university, in the case of DM Squared for Strathclyde, it means they're going to operate like a mini supply chain. So they're going to try and create 3 factories, if you like, and have a supply chain across them. The fact they've got those facilities and can do it that way, it gives you really interesting consequences. So really, really strong consortium. They're all launched or launching. They got the funding in September. Some are a bit further ahead than others in terms of that fast start, but all doing some really interesting stuff. My challenge is how to work across the centres. How do we get value collectively from it? So if we're building platforms in one place, we don't build it. We don't build 2 platforms in each of the research centres when one might do. We announced yesterday, if you see the announcement, it says 50 million. That's because they included the co-investment in the announcement. We invested 20 million yesterday into what's called the Smart Factory Innovation Hub. We ran a competition for about 18 months or so. It took a bit longer than we would have liked to get there, in all truth. That's not a criticism of the applicants, but just to get to the point when we really felt like we had the strongest option. They were very much an SME-focused agenda around it. They're creating a data exchange platform, or mutual data society, as they call it, for SME manufacturers, where you can share your information within that and get some extracted intelligence from it. It's a really interesting idea. A lot of people have tried bits of it, and we're really, really interested to see where it goes. So a lot of novelty and some risk, if we're honest, in terms of how that might work. Create a series of virtual manufacturing test beds where you can go and trial out your ideas in a digital environment, and increasingly now we're building out some links to physical environments so you can create digital twins. and they'll have some funding available for SMEs, manufacturers, technology companies, and so on to really progress solutions a little bit further. Because it's a university-led, one of the things we asked them to do in the rounds of the application was to make sure you had proper industrial engagement and national reach. They've got really quite a broad consortium, again, really interesting. So when we thought about who might apply for this, we didn't think Ulster University would. It wasn't really on our radar, and they've come through with a really strong proposal, and we look forward to see what they do going forward. We have one from the supply chain. It already exists. It's been up and running for about 9 months. It's a £10 million investment, or if you read their brief, it's a £30 million programme. It's £10 million of my money goes into it in that sense. Again, they're quite a strong collaboration with people like TWI, NPL, High Value Manufacturing Catapult, manufacturing technology providers and investors. They've had a chance to refresh their vision, which is the one you can see there, and to really try and create that ecosystem is a big part of it, and to make sure it's targeting critical issues for supply chains going forward. Resilience being an obvious topic, but traceability, sustainability, and so on. There's other major areas of interest within digital supply chains. And they want to do kind of 4 things, and it is similar to what the Smart Factory one will do. There will be a network of living labs and test beds, so we want to be able to do rapid innovation in these environments. Create some sort of big flagship projects, so some of those are already launched. Create a community around that, so again, connecting people. So we can, as I build on the connected everything type examples about how do I really pull people together, and create that platform for continuous collaboration. So it's not just a one-shot, we do a project and we leave. So trying to build some of that. It's a really interesting example there. So if I try to sort of wrap some of it up as I open up for any questions people have. It's a little bit of a truism, but transformation is happening across all the sectors. It's one of the great joys of my job. I get to reach across all the sectors. I see what everybody's doing, not everybody. I see what a lot of different sectors are doing. I see fascinating, innovative companies. I see some brilliant ideas in the university base. But all of that is underpinned in a lot of cases by the value of data and digitalization. It's common across everybody. Just one little anecdote. We had a session where we were looking at if we want to make a fast start on some innovations across manufacturing, what might be interesting. We pulled food. I think you might have been in the session. We pulled some food, pharmaceuticals, aerospace and automotive people together. Somebody from BA Systems said, I've got these 4 ideas. What do you think? Within less than 10 minutes, all sectors said, idea 3. That's the idea for us. So you have, the more I went into the session yesterday in Strathclyde, I know very little about pharmaceuticals. 10 minutes into the meeting, I'm realizing how common all these issues are across all sectors. So it really is a common issue across all. We're trying to build the program that I've described. We're pleased that everything's pretty much launched or launching. I've certainly contracted all the major elements of it. There's a few more things to come, but small. But they're still open. So our research centres, innovation hubs are still open for further collaboration. So join in if you can. We did some work in trying to understand how good are we really. Everybody says we're the world's best at things. And when we look at those Industry 4 technology types, the 2 that come out the best are AI and robotics. If you look from a UK point of view and compare yourself internationally, generally as a topic area for AI, we're competitive with the number of spin-out companies, the amount of public investment, the amount of private investment. There's lots of different ways you look at it, patent development, so on. We're pretty strong in the UK, and that's reassuring to hear. You take the exact same data set and filter for manufacturing. So AI use in manufacturing, it reduces down quite a bit. My advisory board tells me this is a strategic technology for manufacturing, and yet there isn't a pipeline of those companies. So we've got some work to do in terms of AI. Robotics, the story is usually that robot density in the UK is much lower than other industrialized economies, particularly in Germany, which would give you a slightly miserable view of robotics in the UK. And then you go and look at particularly the research investments in the UK. We've got a strong base in robotics. It's a surprise to me in terms of how broad and distributed that is. The difference between robotics and AI is very London-centric. Just as an aside, if you look at where the sort of centre of gravity heat map for the UK is very London-centric. See, we didn't do blockchain, but blockchain would have the same footprint. We do have a world-class innovation base. Every time I go to one of these events, I'm always struck by how brilliant the people are and the exciting things we're doing. But universities, the Catapult Network, the industry, actually that collaboration, I think, is getting better and better. Maybe it's triggered by the pandemic. We're all just pleased to see other people, and we're happy to collaborate. But I do see it as a real strength, and I think the more we can embrace that, the better. It doesn't mean we all have to do TRL6 stuff. That's not what I mean. But that to bring industry right back to the really fundamental ideas and to sort of stretch their thinking, and for industry to really challenge academics and so on about how does this really apply to our problems and so on, and getting that tension right across that range is really important. From my side, there's so much more to do, right? So in the phone call, I take you back to December 2019. I think this is brilliant. Got 147 million, and then you go across all manufacturing sectors and across all these technology types. You know, there's plenty we do, and we're very proud of the work that we're doing. But there's loads more to do. I think about the scale of that transformation that I talked about and how digitalization can play its part in it. There's still a lot more to do. I don't feel I have all the answers. I certainly don't have all the answers about how are we going to deliver all that stuff at net zero and what's the role of digitalization. But we need to look, I think, from my side, in terms of digitalization of our own product development, but also the end of life, and to try and increase the amount of effort we put into that. Certainly that's what I'm trying to push from our side and try and make the case for, to build on the progress we've made, but to extend it out a little bit further across the life cycle, left and right, and to try and take advantage of the opportunities that are coming, because they're inevitably here. They are extremely challenging. You know, making a lot of the things that we currently make a lot better and a lot differently is no mean feat. If we already knew how to do it, we'd already be doing it. And also the rest of the world is trying to do it too. So yes, we've got some really good strengths, and we should play to our strengths and take advantage of them, but we need to recognize we're in a competitive environment, so it's going to be hard work to try and deliver all that, but I believe it's possible.